During the tumultuous 15th century, the last century which we might properly call medieval, it was in the period following the Great Plague, when half the population of Europe was lost, and as a result, all of feudal society was reconstituting itself into a form more favorable to the commoner. This was a century before the Protestant Reformation, but when lay people were already discontent with the leadership of the medieval church, a time when the Lancastrian king seized control and ruled England, only to be challenged successfully by the House of York in the second half of the century. It was a time of popular revolt, both political and religious, when common men from Kent could march on the capital and hold it hostage for almost 5 days, when the king could not be counted on to be in his right mind, when England was at war with the French over who was the rightful heir to the French throne. It was, as I said, a tumultuous period. And Oxford, of course, was under intense scrutiny for its role in fomenting some of this religious and political dissent. Reginald Pecock arrived here, to Oriel that is, from Wales in about 1408. He would have been about 16 years old. Students started university younger back then. And he stayed another 16 years, during which time he earned his BA, MA, and Bachelor of Theology degrees, before leaving for his first benefice at St. Michael's Church in Gloucester in 1424. His time in university was defined in large part by conflict between parties who were either supportive of the outside oversight of Archbishop of Canterbury Thomas Reginald, another Oriel alum, and those who wanted to preserve the university's privileges and independence. Between 1407 and 1409, so right in the period that Pecock first arrives, Reginald had promulgated a set of rules that allowed for the regulation of curriculum to guard against the intrusion of the ideas of John Wycliffe. Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation, was an Oxford academic of the prior generations whose ideas at this time were considered a great threat to the spiritual health of the medieval church. These very ideas, however, also gained widespread popularity and spread far beyond this university town to serve as a foundation for the English Reformation in the years to come. Church authorities were interested in preventing this spread. Most faculty then, like now I suspect, did not want to be told what they could and could not debate, what they could and could not teach. And Oriel happened to be at the center of the power struggle between the university and the church, since the leaders of the anti-censorship policies were Oriel men. Pecock was not among them. Indeed, there is a certain irony that Pecock would be convicted of heresy in the last days of his life, for he spent most of it supporting ecclesiastical and royal prerogative. He liked hierarchy, and he argued for the importance of obedience to church authority as the most reasonable and spiritually safe path for lay people. Now, his commitment to church authority may account for his unusual professional success in the absence of a clear patron, and Pecock was very successful. After becoming bishop of first St. Asaph's and then Chichester, he moved throughout his clerical career. He devoted his time to writing and advancing the production and dissemination of religious books to lay people. This at a time before the printing press had come to England, when all writing was still done by hand, usually on parchment and at great expense. He wrote more than 30 books during his lifetime, both in Latin and in English, in formal, syllogistic style. In this lifetime, he argued, we do not have full access to certain faith. Rather, what we possess is a probable faith that we receive through the exercise of our natural reason. And he believed that this faith was strengthened when all Christians could read about theology, as opposed to just hearing about it in church. English, however, was not considered appropriate for laymen at this period. It was an approach that was closely affiliated with the Lollards, that is, the lay people who continued to sympathize with Wycliffe's criticisms of the church. Around the time that Pecock was in his mid to late 60s, because of his unorthodox methods, as well as his unusual catechesis, and likely for political reasons as well, the bishop was accused of sowing heretical and seditious ideas. Complaints were made to the king, Henry VI that is, who passed them on to then Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Boucher. The king would have been concerned about any potential for sedition, since his own position was so tenuous, and religious nonconformity often went hand in hand with political revolt. Although Pecock was initially cleared of the charges and then restored to good fame, he confessed minor errors. His enemies persisted in their persecution of him, and he was eventually forced to recant several articles, which the surviving evidence shows are a patent misreading of his ideas. On the second Sunday of Advent, December 4th, 1457, in the courtyard of St. Paul's Cathedral, among a crowd of some 20,000 or more witnesses. This at a time when London had a population of no more than 50,000 people. Pecock knelt at the foot of St. Paul's cross and confessed to presuming his own natural wit and preferring the natural judgment of reason before the Old Testament and the New, and the authority and determination of our Mother Holy Church. And then he handed over 14 of his own books to be burnt. 13 days later at Carfax, the Chancellor of Oxford oversaw the burning of every work that Pecock wrote that could be found in the university town. No doubt Oriel researched thoroughly at the time. This punishment, however, did not satisfy those who thought Pecock a threat to the realm. In the next year and a half, his accusers pointed out that if Pecock had been a heretic when he was consecrated to the See of Chichester, the appointment would have been invalid. And when it was discovered that he had also hidden some of his books, Pecock was declared a relapsed heretic. As an act of mercy, since the usual punishment for relapse was execution, Pecock was sent to live his final days in isolation in a small anchoritic cell in Thorney Abbey in the fens of Cambridgeshire. This is back before the marshes were drained for agricultural use, and still it was quite cold and muggy then. Pecock disappears from the historical record thereafter. So why do I hesitate when people ask if Pecock was a heretic? I suppose it is because I have great sympathy for the man who meant so well in bringing theological learning to the average person. I can get defensive of him, can list each of the ways that the articles which he was forced to recant were actually a misreading. I can make arguments about how he was a martyr of the church. But I also know that this defensiveness overlooks the context of the confession. Pecock admitted to spiritual presumptuousness, to preferring his own reason to the authority of Scripture and the church. And whatever technical defense one can mount, it's true that he overestimated his own abilities and came to conclusions that were outside the pale in an attempt to reshape Scripture's narrative into one syllogism. In today's gospel reading, we hear that the field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. Tares are a kind of weed, whose seed, the darnel seed, is indistinguishable from wheat seeds. Flour made from these bad plants is bitter, poisonous. No doubt, we would like think of ourselves as the wheat, the children of God, and not the tares, the children of the wicked one. We would like to think of ourselves as the righteous, and not the heretic, as Pecock no doubt thought of himself. And yet imagine that you are yourself a stalk in that field of wheat and weeds. How easy would it be to look out at the other stalks in the field and declaim which is bitter and which beneficial? To forget that you are yourself unknown. Jesus tells us that the tares will not be separated from the wheat until the time of harvest. That is the end of the world, doomsday. To do so before then would risk unrooting the good with the bad. And that seems to be our lesson. To remember that we are not the reaper, but merely a plant in the field, ignorant of the end of our days. That we are called not to judge, but to live with restraint, tolerance, humility,